Boom! What's up, everyone? We are officially live, as always, here at the broadcast studios of Progress Capital and Progress Realty Partners, aka our office in Tinton Falls, New Jersey. This is What Say You with Progress Realty Partners. My name is Dan Salonis.
What's up, guys? I'm Adam Dickert.
And we have today, probably the most special guest we could possibly have. She is known as the Queen of Loans. Her name is Kathy Anderson. Kathy, how you doing?
I am doing great, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming on with us. Guys, every week we get questions sent in to us from investors throughout the country, asking us our opinion on different circumstances, questions about commercial real estate. And with everything going on in the debt world, we're getting a bunch of debt questions in, so no better person to bring in than Kathy for that. So we're going to jump right into this thing because Kathy, actually, the first question we got was a debt question, and it's from Nick from California. He wants to know, what do lenders consider a strong borrower? As a borrower, how do I get the best rates possible? So, Kathy, what say you?
You know, that's a very broad question because people say, what's a strong borrower? So a strong borrower can be many things. All right, you can be a strong borrower because you have experience. So if you're buying retail or multifamily, you may have a lot of experience, but you may not have a lot of assets. Another way it could be a strong borrower is if you have a lot of assets, but you may be buying you may have a lot of multifamily assets, but you're going to go buy a shopping center. So the bank may say, while he has experience in one area, he doesn't have experience in the area he's buying in. So the strongest borrower is a borrower who has experience in the asset class that they're buying or refinancing, and they have liquidity. We find, and I know I see a lot of financial statements, and I have many, many clients who are asset rich and cash poor. And today, banks are really looking at liquidity. So to the extent that as a borrower, you can arrange your, business to, maybe sell something or refinance something and keep some cash around, when they look at that financial statement, everybody's asking, show me backup for liquidity. So liquidity is king today.
Huh.
Yeah, it's a good answer.
And Kathy, is there like a magic number? If you're going for like $1 million loan, do you need to show $2 million of liquidity? Is there a magic number for that?
No. They want to see that you have enough that if, God forbid, you lost a tenant or you had to do some repairs or maintenance that were not accounted for in your budget, that you have the strength to carry the property. So they're not going to expect to see $2 million of liquidity for $1 million shopping center, or $1 million multifamily. Maybe $100,000 or $200,000 of liquidity, just enough to carry your property, let's call it for 6 months to a year, plus handle any unknown maintenance items that come up. But it gets a little bit more complicated when you have 50 properties, and they say, okay, well, what would you need if you had to take care of 50 properties that had a problem? So there's just no box for the answer.
Liquidity is king.
You have to have some liquidity.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
No,
all right. Dan, next question's for you. Our buddy Jeremy in Georgia. No idea who Jeremy is, but
what's up,
he's buying a property. Yeah. He's buying a property from a mom and pop seller.
Property, right? And also how old the property is. A direct example, we have a newer retail center down in North Carolina. Our expense ratio is about 25% of our gross revenue. So I would say, depending on the age of the property, if you're looking at an older property, maybe it was built in the 80s, the early 90s or something, maybe you want to start out at a baseline of maybe 40% of your effective gross revenue. If it's a newer property, it was maybe redeveloped in the last couple of years or just newly built, within the last few years, I would be surprised to know the expenses were much more than 20 or 25% of the effective gross revenue. But without knowing the particulars of the property you're looking at, that would be my overall guidance. If it's older, maybe be more conservative, start around 40%. If it is a newer construction or newly redeveloped property, you might be able to get away with 25%. But ultimately, I would always be more conservative in your projections of what the expenses are if you can't get them from the ownership group. Like in this case, it's a mom and pop. They just don't have the files on hand. They don't really, keep the accounting as tight as maybe an institutional buyer would or an institutional owner. So that's my baseline. 25% for newer properties, around 40% plus for older properties is what I would underwrite for. But be as conservative as possible.
Always be conservative. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kathy, we got another debt question here, and this is Joel from Pennsylvania. So shout out to Joel. He said, I'm considering getting a CMBS loan. What are the pros and cons?
Well, before you enter into a CMBS loan, I think that you have to carefully consider the options, because CMBS loans are, like a fancy little thing dangling in front of you, because they provide higher leverage, non-recourse, interest-only options, usually lower rates. So if you're a borrower, you say, Jesus, checks all the boxes. Why wouldn't I want a CMBS loan? Okay. Then when you get into it, you have reporting, sometimes certified financial statements, audited financial statements. You have a very onerous prepayment structure. So if you know that you're actually buying something and you're putting it on the shelf for 10 years without question, okay, then you can maybe consider it. But read the fine print. We're working on a project right now that we have a situation where the 200,000 square foot shopping center, 100% leased. One of the tenants is dark, and the CMBS lender wants to sweep all the rents. And now, it's battle royale with them. So you don't really know the sand traps you're going to fall in with a CMBS loan until you're into it. But once you're into it, you say, why did I do this? Like, that's always what I hear from my clients. Why did you tell me to take a CMBS loan? Right. And I say, well, I didn't tell you to take it. I offered you the options, and you wanted the rate, the non-recourse, the leverage, and all of the things that come with it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot more, even just based on what you're saying, a lot more risks involved than just looking at, all right, I'm getting a great interest rate. I'm going to boost my cash flow. Let's lock this thing in. It's not as simple as that. So definitely be careful with the CMBS loans. They're attractive, but they're like the girl you went to high school with. She looks great, but there was a reason you didn't date her in high school. There's maybe you should avoid her this time around too.
Aren't you marrying your girlfriend from high school, Dan?
Yeah, I found a good one though. You find a good one, you got to hang on to.
I guess she doesn't have any sand traps.
No sand trap. Well, I think it was Goodfellas. You get what, 2 chances at a good girl, or 3 chances maybe. So you can't pass them up. But Adam, I got a question for you now, and this is Buddy from Tennessee. And I don't know what Buddy looks like, but I picture he's got like a hat on with like a piece of straw hanging out of his mouth or something. Yeah. He said, "What red flags should I be looking out for when reading through retail leases?"
When reading through retail leases?
Yep, retail leases, which I guess, in some cases could be office leases too.
Yeah, some layover. Retail specifically depends on the size of the tenant and if they have a national presence or not. But some of the things like Kathy mentioned with the CMBS loan, go dark clause is definitely something that we look after. Make sure you understand it thoroughly, understand what it means for the center, understand what it means for the other tenants and the synergy for the asset. Along those same lines would be a co-tenancy clause. If a tenant goes dark, does that mean other tenants now have the right to pay half rent if you need 70% of the asset occupied or something along those lines? Not too uncommon in a lot of larger retail deals. Guarantors, understand who the guarantor is, if there's a guarantor, and what that means for their business and for your retail asset. And then another one that we really look for is caps on CAM reimbursements.
Yeah.
Food Line is notorious for this. Great company, great traffic driver, great tenant. Every single Food Line that I think I've ever seen, with the exception of one or two, they always have caps, right? They have a 5% cap on their CAM reimbursement from the previous year. You as a landlord, you want to do a new roof or spruce up the center a little bit, they're not reimbursing a large chunk of that expense. They're usually 20 to 30% of the GLA or income. On the lower end, 20 to 30% of your expense is not going to be reimbursed if you're hitting that cap. So keep an eye out for some of those things, and also maybe sales, right? Understand which tenants report sales, how they report, how often they report, and grab your hands around the health of the actual business itself.
Yeah, great points. Go ahead, Kat.
Yeah, you made an interesting point, because I have a client now who has a center and he lost one of his tenants, which is a pretty good chunk of the space. And his other larger tenant is Harbor Freight, and Harbor Freight had a clause in there that if 50% or more of the center was vacant, they get half rent. And there's a tiny little mom and pop sliver of a tenant in there, which is the one who can either make it more than 50 or less than 50. And they are not paying rent, and he cannot evict them, because by evicting them, he's then creating a bigger problem with Harbor Freight.
Right.
So they have been in the center for about a year, rent free, and they're probably sitting there going, why isn't this guy evicting me?
Yeah, right.
It's a strategic move. Because I said to him, why are you letting them get away with it? He goes, because I have to. But they don't know that.
Yeah,
it's like a snowball effect.
Yeah, right. It'll open up a whole different, Pandora box.
Yeah, they just think he's being a nice landlord.
Which the heck, it has its pros too. Adam, you brought up too, it sparked a thought of mine. You mentioned the guarantor. One of the things you got to look out for too is there any runoff on the guarantee? Does the guarantee last the length of the lease, or does it only last 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be? So you may be thinking you're buying a property that's got a lease guarantor and they're going to be for the life of the lease, and that's not always the case. We, in our North Carolina property, we have Planet Fitness, and prior to us buying it, it was guaranteed by the operator, who was a multi-unit operator, and his guarantee actually ran off. And we kind of navigated around that through COVID. One of the agreements we made with him to kind of help with rent deferrals and stuff was that he put his guarantee back on his lease for the length of the lease. So that's one to look out for. And then also on the CAM reimbursement side, kind of tying into it, make sure that the tenants are reimbursing 100% pro rata, and it's not off any type of base year, because you may be thinking you're going to get full reimbursement for them on property taxes, for instance, but it's only, above and beyond the base year, which could have only been 2 years ago. So instead of giving you, $10,000 towards real estate tax reimbursements, they only may be giving you $1,000 because it's based on when they initially moved in. So great points. I just want to kind of, elaborate on those a little bit more too. So
good points. Kathy, another question for you from Melissa from New Jersey. In a value add situation, what's the best kind of loan to get if my goal is to refinance down the road? That's a pretty loaded question.
Yeah. Well, it's loaded, but I think I understand what she's saying, okay? Because when you buy a center, let's say you paid $5 million for it, but you're going to go in and make some renovations to it, and then it's worth, let's call it $8 million, $7.5 million. You might want to refinance it and recapture that equity. So you have to have a couple of things that are going for you. You have to have a period of seasoning so that you can demonstrate that you've done your rehab, and then you are able to refinance it. But what's most important is the structure of the loan when you buy it. What are your prepayment penalties? Because if you're going to refinance it in year 2, you don't necessarily want to have a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 prepayment. Because then you'll be paying 5% in year 1 or 4% in year 2. So maybe you negotiate a lower prepayment penalty in exchange for maybe a few bips on the rate. Or you go to a credit union where they don't have a prepayment penalty. Maybe the rate is a little bit higher, but you know that you're not going to be a 5% prepay on $5 million or $4 million is $200,000. You can
money.
pay a little bit more in rate and save yourself the prepayment penalty if you know that's your business plan. Also, some of my clients, what I do for them is I'll do a 3-year loan or a floating rate loan. And on a floating rate loan generally does not have a prepayment prepayment penalty to get out. They might have a small exit fee. Every bank is different, but what I always do when I'm looking at a loan with someone is I say, what are the short-term plans and what are the long-term plans?
Right.
And then I advise how to structure the deal based on what their goals and objectives are, not necessarily just what's the best rate, what's the highest leverage. It's really what are your goals and objectives.
Right. So like in this situation, the flexibility is the biggest kicker. Pay maybe a small premium up front, but gives you the flexibility to do what you want.
Right. And that's important.
You know what, Kathy, too, you said a word that stuck out to me. You said negotiate. And I don't know how many people realize that they can actually negotiate, with the lender on the terms, right? They get a term sheet or whatever the case is. And I think you'd be surprised to know, how many people don't realize that those, to an extent, it's negotiable, right? It's not just black and white, take it or leave it a lot of times. There's always room for, improving certain areas or, trading off certain things like you mentioned earlier in your answer. So it's a good point. You can negotiate these terms a lot of times, especially if it's a deal that the bank, really wants to lend on,
Right. And, not to be self-promoting, but when we do business with a bank and we bring them $300 million worth of loans, or you walk off the street with one $3 million loan, your negotiating power is not the same.
Right.
So the banks are negotiating with us on behalf of our client, but they're really negotiating with us to keep our business flowing.
Right. So that volume of business helps.
Exactly. It's just the way it works, and it works like that in every business. The more purchasing power you have, the more negotiating power you have.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just call them up and tell them what you want, and then they give you a better rate, right? Is that how it works with you?
At this point, I think that's what Kathy does. She says, I don't know if you know who you're talking to right now.
It's not negotiating. You just tell them what you want.
It's not negotiating lately. It's begging.
Yeah.
But we do what we have to do here.
Hey, whatever gets the job done, right?
Right.
All right, guys. Well, listen, that was it. That was actually, we had 5 questions this week. Normally we got 4. Kathy, thank you so much for hopping on. I know there's nobody better to ask than you when it comes to anything debt related. And I'm sure anyone who, is listening in or is going to watch this later on will appreciate the answers you gave. But guys, this was What Say You with Progress Realty Partners. For those of you who don't know, we are a private equity firm that offers direct ownership, commercial real estate investment opportunities with dependable cash flow, and you get to remain 100% passive. And if you ever need debt, if you ever need help getting a mortgage, anything of the sort, if you're not reaching out to Kathy Anderson, if you're not reaching out to Progress Capital, there's no doubt in my mind you're leaving money on the table. So do yourself the favor, reach out to us on either front. But that was it for this week's What Say You, guys. I think we did a pretty decent job. What do you think? Good?
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I'll catch you on Thursday for a beer.
Yeah, there we go.
See you there.
Thirsty Thursday.
Thirsty Thursday with Adam on Thursday.
Yes.
But, guys, thanks for coming in. Check out our websites, prp.us and progresscapital.com. But until next week, hopefully we'll get a couple of more questions and be able to give you a couple more answers. But we'll see you guys later.